This cup is yours. It calms people like you. Just be agreeable. No one needs to know.
A cold line ran down my spine. By the end the lab will speak. Steam curled. The neon clock buzzed above the kitchen table. She pushed the other cup closer, the one with the lipstick rim. Its red print curved lightly where a mouth had been careless. I felt the ceramic's heat graze my fingers and did not lift. Everyone watched, nothing the way families do when something sharp hovers. I smiled instead and slid my cup an inch farther away. Her eyes flicked to the rim, then to my hand, then back. I thought of the word agreeable and how it bruises quiet women. Kitchen lights hummed over the stacked plates and the sweating pitcher. I turned the saucer slowly so the lipstick mark faced the room. If stories tangle, the lab will untie them without raising its voice. My shoulders tightened, then softened as breath found a slower rhythm. Do you want my cup or yours on the table? She laughed like I had told a joke about weather and nerves. You always dramatize the small things, she said, rearranging our spoons. The fridge hummed softly, a steady noise that made truth sound ordinary. I had come early to help set the table and fold napkins. Family dinner meant roast chicken, green beans, and careful conversation about nothing important. But her invitation felt like a test I had not agreed to. Across the room the neon clock buzzed beside the calendar and shopping list. Friday dinner was circled in blue, a note reading bring dessert please. I underlined it with my eyes and kept my voice even. My brother carried in plates and pretended not to see our hands. He asked about work, about the neighbor's fence, about the grocery prices. I answered with light words, then looked at the cups like a meter. I had seen sudden kindness cover sharpness before, like frosting over salt. It stings because you expect sweet and find something else under your tongue. So I waited, steady, counting breaths and letting the steam drift sideways. The family lawyer's number sat in my phone under plain initials. We had spoken once about boundaries, witnesses, and why paper calms rooms. He said in simple words, a lab report is a quiet witness. I remembered and lifted my eyes from the cup to her mouth. The lipstick had feathered slightly, a handsome color that did not suit me. She touched the rim with a napkin, then set it down quickly. My breath eased because patience felt like grip, not surrender tonight. I would not accuse without proof. The room deserved better than that. Truth lands cleaner when paper arrives before the raised voices and tears. She poured more tea, flooded my cup to the brim with sweetness. The scent was floral and heavy like spring pushed through a screen. Try it, she said, tell me if it settles your nerves. I lifted the cup I had chosen and let the heat speak first. It warmed my palms and gave me time to look at everyone. I said I would wait for dinner and set it back down. The air vent whirred from the hallway and pressed a cool stripe along my arm. Outside rain ticked faintly. Inside the mantle clock tapped out patient seconds. I thought of Friday circled in blue like a promise I could keep. My brother said grace early as if timing might settle our nerves. We held hands, then let go, and the room breathed again. I felt steadier with both palms on wood and my voice quiet. She asked about my doctor, the gentle way people frame private questions. Are you taking something now, she said, smiling like a nurse. I said I am taking patience and it has few side effects. We ate slowly, or pretended to, while the cups cooled between us. I moved mine by inches, leaving a dry ring where the saucer rested. The other left a faint kiss of color on the white glaze. Her voice softened, but her eyes shone like lights behind tinted glass. You could stop making everything difficult, she said, polishing the rim again. I said peace is not difficult when honesty enters the room. She rolled her eyes at my brother and fluffed the napkins. He shrugged like a man standing between weather and a leaking roof. I kept the temperature low by counting 3 breaths and smiling. Silence settled again, pleasant for anyone who did not hear the buzzing clock. I heard it and felt calmer, like time itself was a witness. I pictured the envelope arriving, my name neat, the test sealed inside. I would bring nothing dramatic to Friday dinner, only paper and steadiness. If someone raised a voice, mine would not follow. Boundaries keep meals safe. No witness, no sign, no pressure, no swallow. We would eat anyway. She stood to fetch dessert and touched the cup without looking. Her napkin smudged the lipstick line into a vague cloud of color. She said accidents happen and smiled like wind smoothing tall grass. I nodded because patience is not weakness, it is rehearsal for truth. I carried my plate to the sink and watched water silver the edges. Behind me chairs scraped and the coffee percolator hiccuped then settled. When I turned the cups still waited, each telling a simple story. One showed a clean rim. One held a colored whisper around its mouth. I chose the cleaner story and saved the other for later reading. Dinner moved forward slow and civil like traffic under watchful lights. I kept my seat, my breath, and the promise I had made. By Friday at 7 the room would listen without anyone raising volume. Tonight I let steam curl and kept truth company. Morning light crept through the blinds pale and steady across the countertop. I pressed my palms flat against the cool surface steadying myself. The house hummed quietly, fridge motor steady, a small comfort in an unsettled week. Ordinary life does not pause for suspicion. Bills need paying, errands must be run, meals prepared. I folded laundry with the rhythm of someone who knows each sleeve and seam. My thoughts returned to the lipstick rim on that cup, small and faint but loud in meaning. At the grocery store neon lights buzzed overhead. I pushed my cart slowly, filling it with simple things: bread, coffee, and fruit. The voices of strangers drifted around me, easy and ordinary. Their chatter was free of the sharp undercurrent I felt last night. My chest tightened, but I kept my pace calm. When I returned home, the neighbor waved across the street, cheerful and unknowing. I waved back, then carried the bags inside. Coffee percolated as I set groceries on the counter. The sound was warm and familiar, though my thoughts kept circling. I remembered her words. "It calms people like you." I replayed the sentence until it pressed like a bruise. Calm is one thing, dismissal is another. I thought of my mother, who always said dignity is quiet until it has to speak. Dinner that night was smaller, only my brother and me. He asked about my doctor. I smiled and gave short answers. My cup stayed at my side untouched while he spoke about work. His words filled the room, but my silence was the truer weight. After he left, I rinsed dishes slowly. Soap bubbles clung to my skin, small prisms catching light. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window. A woman steady enough to wait, steady enough to plan. The mantle clock ticked, marking seconds with discipline. I remembered the family lawyer's advice: documents and tests speak when people falter. I had not yet acted, but the idea took root. Proof would matter more than any quarrel at the table. I gathered my notebook and wrote down a few names and times. Friday dinner was circled on the calendar. That circle became a quiet promise to myself. On Thursday I walked through the neighborhood, autumn leaves scattered along the sidewalk. Porch rain tapped gently on a neighbor's awning. Each sound reminded me that life continues no matter the storms within walls. I stopped at the pharmacy to pick up medicine. The clerk bagged my order and smiled politely. I thought of how paper slips, receipts, and labels hold their truth. They do not change when questioned. Back home I brewed tea and let steam curl upward. The air vent words softly, carrying the scent of dry leaves from outside. I pictured the cup again, the lipstick rim faint but undeniable. It was enough to justify the next step. That evening my phone buzzed with a message from my sister-in-law. A short line: "Don't forget dessert Friday." Polite words, simple words, yet loaded with undertone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I did not reply right away. Instead I set my phone face down and returned to the stove. Green beans sizzled in the pan, oil popping gently. I stirred them slowly, focusing on sound, smell, and the truth that waited in silence. Night settled. The hallway carried the faint scent of Lysol from my cleaning earlier. I moved from room to room, adjusting lights, checking locks. My body knew routine even as my mind prepared for Friday. I thought of bringing a witness. Maybe the lawyer, maybe a neighbor. Someone steady, someone who understood that proof should not be argued away. Friday drew closer, each day marked by the ticking clock and the quiet buzz of neon at the grocery. I kept steady, never raising my voice, never rushing. Silence stretched, but silence can be patient when truth is gathering. The night before dinner I folded linens and placed them neatly on the shelf. My brother called, reminding me of the time. His voice was casual, unbothered. I wondered how much he saw, how much he chose to ignore. I pressed my palm against the cool countertop again, grounding myself. Steam rose from the coffee pot. Porch rain tapped the railing. Each sound told me I was still steady. I whispered quietly, "Friday will tell the rest." The neon clock buzzed in agreement. Friday dinner would hold more than food. It would hold the truth. The kitchen smelled of roast chicken, garlic, and sweet rolls cooling on the counter. Chairs scraped against the floor as everyone settled in. My brother poured water into glasses, the sound steady against the hum of the fridge. She arrived late carrying a dessert box, her smile brighter than the overhead light. She kissed cheeks, smoothed napkins, and spoke with the charm of someone who rehearsed friendliness. My eyes tracked her every move, not with anger but with careful patience. The lipstick rim appeared again, faint but present when she set her cup near mine. I noticed the curve of color and said nothing yet. My hands folded neatly in my lap as conversation began. The table filled with voices. Stories about neighbors, small-town gossip, the price of milk. My brother laughed louder than usual, eager to keep things light. I listened, but the cup remained at the corner of my vision. She turned to me with soft words. "You look pale, are you resting enough?" "I'm fine," I answered. "You know, some teas really help." "I choose my own teas," I said calmly. Silence stretched for a beat too long, then my brother cleared his throat. He asked about church service, about the new hymn book. The mantle clock ticked through the pause, patient and unbothered. I reached for bread, tearing it slowly, crumbs scattering across the plate. My eyes stayed on hers. She did not look back, her smile aimed elsewhere, practiced and safe. The lipstick rim stayed where it was. A small circle of evidence in plain sight, ignored by most but not by me. Conversation carried on. Someone laughed at a story about a neighbor's dog. Forks clinked against plates, chairs shifted, glasses touched. But beneath it all the cup waited. I steadied my breath. Proof does not need noise. Proof waits. I touched the saucer, turned it gently, and let the rim face the table. The kitchen light hummed above stacked plates. I turned the saucer so the lipstick rim showed clearly. If words tangle, this circle will hold straight. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed calm. "This cup isn't mine, is it?" The table stilled. My brother looked confused, eyes darting between us. She laughed quickly, a laugh too sharp for the moment. "You always dramatize things," she said, brushing at the rim with her napkin. Her hand trembled slightly, but her voice carried sweetness. "It's just a smudge, nothing more." I held her gaze. "It's not mine." My brother sighed. "Please, let's not make a scene tonight." His voice sounded tired, a plea rather than command. But silence stretched heavy. The fridge hummed louder, or maybe the room had grown too still. She leaned back, folding arms across her chest. "Why do you always suspect me? Why ruin dinner for everyone?" I breathed deep. "Dinner isn't ruined. Truth doesn't ruin meals. It keeps them honest." Her cheeks flushed. She dabbed the rim again with her napkin until the mark blurred. "It's nothing. You imagine things. Gaslight." I felt it like a draft slipping through an open window. My brother nodded slowly, choosing peace over conflict. "Maybe it was an accident. Maybe it doesn't matter." I wanted to speak louder, but dignity demanded restraint. My breath steadied. My fingers pressed into the edge of the table, grounding me. I reached for the chicken, served myself calmly, and passed the plate onward. My silence said more than any accusation. She smiled again, wide and false. "See, we're fine. No need to dwell." But I knew. The rim had spoken, and denial could not erase it. The mantle clock ticked. Dessert box waited unopened. Coffee percolator hiccuped on the counter. Life went on as though the moment had not cracked the air. I chose patience again. Proof deserves the right stage. Dinner continued. Stories resumed, laughter returned, though thinner than before. My brother kept talking, stringing words like fragile lights across a storm. I let him. He wanted peace. I wanted truth. When dessert came, she cut neat slices, placing them carefully on plates. Her smile never faltered. Mine did not either. I watched crumbs scatter, sugar dust floating under the kitchen light. Her hand trembled when she passed me my plate. I noticed, but I said nothing. She leaned closer and whispered, "You're making this family miserable." I kept my voice level. Families can stand truth. Lies are heavier. Her smile widened for the others, but her eyes sharpened at me. She cut another slice, slower this time, then placed the knife down harder than needed. The fridge rattled softly. The air vent pushed cool air along my ankle. The kitchen felt crowded, though no one had moved. Conversation limped along, but I did not. Inside, I marked the night. I had shown the rim, and the room had seen. Whether they admitted it or not, it was there. After dinner, dishes clattered in the sink. She offered to help, but her movements were stiff. My brother carried plates, avoiding both our eyes. I rinsed cups, carefully turning each one slowly under the faucet. Water traced the rim, washing color into the drain. Evidence washed away, but memory did not. I dried the cups and placed them upside down, their rims hidden now. The night ended with polite farewells. She hugged me quickly, perfumed and smiling, but her hand was cold. My brother kissed my cheek, weary, distracted. When the door closed, I stood alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked, the fridge hummed, the air vent whirred. Ordinary sounds filled an extraordinary silence. I pressed my palm flat against the counter. The cool stone steadied me. She had laughed, denied, shifted blame. My brother had pleaded for peace, but the lipstick rim had spoken. I whispered to myself, not yet. But soon. The coffee percolator sighed once more. The neon clock buzzed above the table. Dinner had ended, but the truth had not. The circle of color, faint and undeniable, had already chosen its witness. The room would remember, even if voices pretended otherwise. And I would wait for Friday, when silence could no longer shield her. The house felt emptier after everyone left. Chairs still crooked around the table, crumbs scattered like echoes of voices that pretended to laugh. I stood alone in the kitchen, my hand resting on the counter's edge. The lipstick rim had spoken, but denial shouted over it. My brother's sigh, her laughter, the dismissal of truth, they lingered louder than the evidence itself. I rinsed the last dish under warm water, steam fogging my glasses. The faucet's hiss filled the silence until the mantle clock struck once, sharp and final. My chest tightened with doubt. What if I had overread it? What if suspicion colored my eyes too darkly? Families fracture not only on lies but on the weight of mistrust. I pressed the dish towel flat on the counter, steadying my hands. The fridge hummed, a faithful background sound. I leaned against the door, closing my eyes. Memory replayed the rim, her smirk, my brother's tired plea. I told myself silence was not weakness, but even patience can ache. That night I lay awake, rain tapping faintly on the porch rail. My mind argued both sides, proof waits for paper, yet the heart demands relief sooner. Sleep never came easily when questions outweighed answers. Morning light returned with no mercy. I brewed coffee, the percolator sighing like an old friend. I sat with my cup, but warmth could not quiet the restless voice inside. By mid-morning I called the family lawyer. His voice was steady, practiced in patience. I asked about tests, about lab reports, about whether a cup could carry proof beyond denial. He explained in simple words, a lab report does not argue. It states facts. It shows what is present, not what is imagined. His calm tone steadied me more than the coffee. I thanked him and promised to bring what mattered. He said, bring only patience until then. Friday will be soon enough. The air vent whirred above my head, carrying cool air through the room. I felt lighter, though not free. The plan was simple, but courage must stretch to fill the waiting days. That afternoon I walked to the mailbox. The street smelled faintly of damp leaves, Lysol lingering from a neighbor's morning cleaning. Children's laughter echoed faintly down the block, sharp against the quiet in my chest. I carried letters inside, stacked them neatly, and returned to the calendar. Friday was still circled in blue. I drew a second circle around it, darker this time. Doubt did not vanish. It never does. But structure steadies even fragile faith. I marked time with chores, sweeping floors, folding laundry, listening to the steady tick of the mantle clock. At lunch I sliced bread, each crumb falling soft against the cutting board. My knife moved steady like a line through confusion. Each slice made a rhythm I could trust. Later I wiped the counters with slow strokes, the scent of lemon cleaner filling the air. I breathed deep, letting the smell ground me. Doubt still whispered, but routine carried more weight. Evening brought my brother's call. His voice sounded lighter, as if nothing lingered from dinner. He spoke about Aaron's work and the new hymn at church. He did not mention the rim nor her laugh. When he asked how I was, I answered gently, steady enough. He accepted it, never pressing further. Some truths stay unspoken until paper demands them. After we hung up, I stared at the silent phone. Family peace can look like denial, but I would not let truth be buried under politeness. I sat at the kitchen table, pen in hand, and wrote quietly, Friday, bring patience, bring paper, bring witness. The words steadied my hand. The fridge hummed again. I listened longer than usual, as if its steady drone could drown out doubt. My chest loosened slightly. Before bed I stood by the window. Porch rain tapped the rail again, slower this time, softer. I whispered, a promise Friday will hold more than food. The night answered only with silence. When morning came again, I greeted it with calmer breath. I brewed coffee and watched steam curl. I folded yesterday's doubts with the linens and set them aside. Friday waited, but I was ready. The day was circled twice now, a promise inked into the week. Friday approached with the slow certainty of the mantle clock. Each tick carried me closer to a truth that needed more than memory. I had patience, but patience alone would not convince a room that preferred silence. The family lawyer's words stayed with me. Bring only facts. Let them speak. His voice was calm, but his meaning was sharp. If denial met me again, I would need proof steadier than my breath. I began with the cup itself. After dinner I had rinsed it, but I had not forgotten. A faint trace remained on the saucer, pale but present. I sealed it in a small bag, careful not to touch the rim again. My hands trembled slightly, but the act steadied my resolve. The fridge hummed in the background as I labeled the bag with a date and time. Simple details, but dates and times hold more weight than raised voices. I set it aside for the lab. At the clinic, the receptionist greeted me kindly. Her voice was routine, practiced for the everyday needs of strangers. She did not ask why I brought a cup, only checked the form and noted the timestamp. Paperwork carried more strength than suspicion. I signed, initialed, and left quietly. Outside, the grocery neon buzzed faintly across the street. I stopped for bread and milk, blending proof into ordinary errands. Life continued, but my bagged saucer sat sealed in a cooler, waiting for a machine's voice. At home, I gathered other small pieces. A napkin smudged with color, folded by her hand too quickly. I placed it with the saucer. I thought of how flimsy paper can feel, yet how strongly it remembers when eyes choose to see. The mantle clock ticked through the afternoon. I organized bills, receipts, and old notes. My lawyer had said once, order is your ally. Chaos feeds denial. His words returned as I stacked documents neatly, proof of dates, times, and steady routines. That night I wrote down every detail from memory. Her words, her laugh, my brother's sigh. I described the way her hand trembled when she brushed the rim. I recorded the hush that followed my question. Each line felt like a brick building a wall no denial could climb. The next morning I visited the post office. The air smelled faintly of paper and ink, grounding me. I sent copies of my notes to the lawyer, not trusting everything to stay only in my house. Paper travels straighter than whispers. Neighbors waved as I returned, unaware of the quiet weight I carried. I waved back, steady, my face calm. Inside, the air vent whirred softly, keeping the room cool. I sat at the table and breathed slowly. Later I brewed coffee, its aroma filling the kitchen. I let the sound of the percolator soothe me. Proof was not exciting, it was deliberate. Each step mattered, and each step cost me a little sleep. But better lost sleep than lost dignity. On Thursday the lab called. The report was not ready yet, but the technician confirmed the sample was secure. His calm tone reassured me. Machines would read what people dismissed. I hung up and wrote the word secure in my notebook. Small words carry heavy weight. I thought again of her message, don't forget dessert Friday. The politeness was heavy, like a curtain pulled across a stage. I smiled quietly to myself. Dessert would come, but so would paper. The lawyer called back that evening. His voice carried the rhythm of someone who had steadied many storms. He told me, bring the report when it arrives. If it delays, bring your notes. Truth is not loud, but it is steady. I thanked him. After we hung up, I leaned against the counter. The porch rain tapped lightly against the railing outside. The sound reminded me that storms, no matter how sharp, eventually settle. Friday morning dawned. I brewed coffee and folded napkins, letting routine keep my hands busy. The report had not arrived yet, but I trusted it would. Machines do not hurry for feelings, only for accuracy. I prepared a folder. Inside it I placed my notes, the napkin, a copy of the clinic receipt. Each item looked ordinary, but together they formed a quiet chorus. I closed the folder and pressed my hand against it. Warmth steadied me. At noon the phone rang again. The lab confirmed the report was ready for pickup. My chest loosened, air filling more freely than it had in days. I thanked them, wrote the time, and left immediately. The clinic lobby was quiet, the scent of disinfectant faint but familiar. The technician handed me an envelope sealed and stamped. My name sat neatly across the top. I held it like something sacred, not because of drama but because of weight. I carried it home, carefully set it on the kitchen table and stared. I did not open it. Not yet. Truth deserves an audience. The fridge hummed behind me, steady and faithful. The mantle clock ticked on. I touched the envelope once more and slid it into the folder. Now the chorus was complete. The folder sat ready, waiting for Friday night. I stood at the window, watching cars pass slowly under the streetlight. Life continued ordinary and unbothered. Inside, the truth waited, silent but undeniable. I whispered softly, "Friday will hear you." The coffee percolator sighed once more, as if in agreement. Friday evening arrived with its own heaviness. The house smelled of roasted meat and baked rolls, the familiar fragrance masking the tension in the air. The mantle clock tapped each second, like a reminder that silence could not last forever. I carried my folder tucked beneath my arm. It was not large, not heavy, but it carried weight greater than its size. My steps across the kitchen floor were steady, though my heart pressed harder than usual. The table was set neatly. Plates stacked, silverware aligned, napkins folded with precision. My brother moved quickly, filling glasses with water, arranging side dishes. He avoided my eyes. She, however, smiled easily, her charm as polished as the dessert she carried in. She placed the cake on the counter and brushed her hands, laughing lightly at some small story about the traffic. Her voice was sugar, but her glance lingered sharp, watching me. I set the folder on the table and folded my hands. I did not open it yet. Proof needs silence first. Dinner began with polite chatter. My brother spoke about church, about errands, about the neighbor's dog that barked too often. I nodded, answering where I should, waiting for the right pause. The fridge hummed behind me, steady as breath. Her voice floated easily, weaving questions about my health, comments about the weather, remarks about how calm the house felt tonight. Calm is a performance, I thought. Calm is fragile when truth is waiting in an envelope. I reached for my fork, cut into the roast, and let conversation run its course. My brother seemed relieved when laughter surfaced, though it felt thinner than usual. The mantle clock struck once. Silence followed, brief but long enough. I slid the folder across the table. Her eyes followed the movement, her smile faltering for a fraction. My brother's hand froze above his plate. The envelope waited, stamped and sealed, sitting in plain view. Kitchen table crowded, neon buzzing faintly above the stove. I slid the folded lab report into the center of the table. If silence broke, this paper would hold steadier than any word. My pulse steadied. My hands no longer trembled. "Read it, please." My brother blinked, confused. "What is this?" he asked softly. She laughed quickly, too quickly. "You're making everything dramatic again." Her hand reached for the envelope, but I stopped her with my eyes. "It's a report," I said, voice calm. "Not a story. Not a suspicion." Her cheeks flushed. She leaned back in her chair. "This is humiliating. You're ruining dinner for everyone." I breathed evenly. Truth ruins nothing. It clears space. My brother looked between us, his face weary. "Do we need to do this now?" I placed my hand on the envelope. "Yes, now is better than later." He sighed, rubbed his forehead and nodded faintly. I slid the paper toward him. His fingers hesitated, then opened the seal. The kitchen seemed to hold its breath. The fridge motor clicked off, leaving the room in thick silence. Even the mantle clock paused between ticks, stretching the moment longer. My brother's eyes scanned the report. His lips parted, but no words came. He read slower, then set the paper down. Her hand shot out, pulling it toward her. She skimmed quickly, then laughed again, though her voice cracked. "It doesn't mean anything. These tests don't prove what you think." I steadied my voice. "They prove enough." She glared at me, then turned to my brother. "You know she exaggerates. She always has. This is nothing but her attempt to look right." He closed his eyes briefly, then folded the paper. "I don't know what to think," he said. His voice cracked with fatigue. She leaned toward him, lowering her voice. "She's making you choose. She wants to tear this family apart. Guilt. Blame. The old tools she always used." I folded my napkin carefully, keeping my hands steady. "No," I said softly. "I want this family to stand. But truth must stand with it." She scoffed, her eyes flashing. "You're impossible." She pushed her plate away. "You can't forgive. You can't move on. You trap us in suspicion." I breathed deep. Suspicion fades when proof arrives. Only denial makes it linger. My brother shook his head, his fork clattering against the plate. Enough. Both of you. I can't handle this tonight. I did not argue. I pressed my palm against the folder, grounding myself. The proof was on the table. Whether they accepted it or not, it was here. She rose suddenly, carrying her plate to the sink with sharp movements. Water ran, covering the tremble in her hands. Her voice carried over the faucet. She'll never stop until she destroys us. I closed my eyes briefly. The fridge clicked on again, humming steady. The neon light buzzed faintly overhead. Life did not pause for denial. I looked at my brother. His shoulders slumped, his hands covering his face. He whispered, "Why can't peace be enough?" I answered gently, "Because peace without truth is only silence." The water shut off. She turned, wiping her hands roughly with a towel. Her voice steadied, cold now. "You'll regret this. You'll see how alone it makes you." I folded my napkin neatly and placed it beside my plate. Maybe. But I'd rather stand alone with truth than sit crowded with lies. The mantle clock struck again, filling the silence with its steady voice. Dinner ended not with resolution but with heavy quiet. My brother gathered dishes without speaking. She avoided my eyes, her smile gone now. I gathered my folder, slid the report back inside and stood. The chair scraped softly against the floor. I did not raise my voice. Proof had already spoken. At the door I paused. Rain tapped lightly on the porch rail outside. I whispered to myself, not tonight. But soon. Behind me the kitchen buzzed with ordinary sounds, the fridge, the clock, the faint drip of a faucet not turned fully off. Ordinary life continued, but nothing was ordinary anymore. The night after dinner stretched long. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the air vent whispering above. My mind replayed every word, every glance, every sigh from the table. The report had spoken, yet she denied. My brother folded under pressure, begging for peace. Peace that asked me to silence myself, to ignore what the paper carried. I rolled to my side, clutching the blanket, torn between fury and patience. The mantle clock ticked steadily in the living room, its rhythm slower than my breath. Each second reminded me that rage was close, sharp, ready to strike. Yet each tick also reminded me that rage could burn bridges beyond repair. At dawn I rose, tired but steadier. I brewed coffee, the percolator sighing as steam curled upward. My hands wrapped around the cup, grounding myself. Heat steadies when hearts waver. I thought of calling her, shouting through the phone, demanding apology. I imagined her laughter, her denial, her words slicing into me again. I set the cup down. That path led nowhere. Instead I reached for my notebook. I wrote slowly, each line deliberate. Dignity is not loud. Boundaries are not rage. Proof speaks best when paired with calm. Later that morning I walked to the lawyer's office. The air outside smelled faintly of damp leaves and rain-soaked wood. My shoes tapped against the sidewalk, steady and purposeful. Inside his office smelled of paper and ink. He looked up from his desk, eyes patient. "You brought it?" he asked. I placed the folder before him. He opened it, read the report and nodded slowly. His voice was calm. "This is enough. But enough does not always win hearts." I swallowed. She denied. She turned it into blame. He folded his hands. "She will. That is her defense. But your choice is not what she does. Your choice is how you respond." I breathed slow and heavy. I wanted to shout. "You didn't," he said. "That matters. And you still shouldn't." The fridge hummed in his small kitchenette, filling the silence between us. He leaned forward. "You can demand terms. Signed. Written. Clear. That is stronger than shouting." I nodded, the thought settling like a stone into place. Terms. Boundaries written down, not yelled across the table. Walking home I noticed the scent of Lysol drifting from a neighbor's hallway. Children's laughter echoed down the street, bright and sharp against the weight I carried. Life moved easily for them, untouched by documents and denials. Back home I sat at the kitchen table. My brother's voice echoed in memory. "Why can't peace be enough?" I whispered back. "Because peace without truth is only quiet suffering." I opened my notebook again and wrote, "Terms must be clear. No yelling. Apology written. Respect signed, not promised." The mantle clock struck noon. I pressed my pen harder against the page. Rage would not win this fight. Discipline would. That evening she called. Her voice was honey at first. We don't have to keep doing this, she said. It's exhausting, everyone. I stayed silent for a moment, letting her words hang. Then I answered softly, truth is not exhausting. Pretending island. Her tone sharpened. You love drama. You live for it. No, I said. I live for honesty. That's all. She laughed, brittle and cold. You'll be alone with your honesty. I let the silence answer her. She hung up quickly. The fridge rattled once, then settled. I pressed my hand against the counter, steady. She thought silence was surrender. But silence can also be discipline. The next morning, I folded laundry with deliberate care. Each shirt, each towel stacked neatly. Small order builds strength for larger battles. I whispered as I worked, I will not rage. I will write. I will witness. The grocery neon buzzed faintly when I stopped for bread. I carried the bag home, simple tasks holding me steady. At night the porch rain tapped against the rail again. I stood by the window, arms folded, watching the water gather. My heart ached, but steadiness grew stronger. By the mantle clock's strike I had decided. Rage would not write my future. Paper would. Saturday sunlight fell across the drapes, pale and steady, carrying none of last night's tension. The house smelled faintly of coffee and lemon cleaner. My hands moved slowly as I wiped the counter, steadying myself for what was to come. The decision was made. I would not argue. I would not shout. I would bring terms written and signed. Proof had spoken already, now boundaries would settle the rest. By afternoon my brother called. His voice was tired, softer than usual. She wants to come by, he said. She says we need to talk. I answered evenly. Yes. But this time we write. He sighed but did not argue. He knew patience was no longer silence. It was action. The mantle clock ticked steadily. I sat at the kitchen table with paper and pen. I wrote slowly, each word a line drawn with care, no yelling. Written apology. Respectful terms signed and witnessed. When the knock came, the fridge hummed in the background. My brother entered first, uneasy. She followed, smiles strained, carrying no dessert this time. Only a small purse tucked under her arm. We sat at the table again. She folded her hands, eyes darting toward the folder beside me. You've made this family heavy, she began. All over nothing. I breathed deeply. It isn't nothing. She leaned closer. You can't keep dragging this out. People are talking. Then let them talk, I said calmly. What matters is what we sign. Her eyes narrowed, but she did not laugh this time. My brother looked between us, weary, caught in the middle again. I opened the folder, slid the paper forward. Not the lab report, he had read that already. This was different. This was terms. Living room, quiet afternoon, sun warming the drapes. I placed the written terms at the center of the table. If denial came again, the ink would hold steady. My breath slowed, shoulders released their tension. Sign here, then we eat. Silence pressed into the room. The air vent whirred softly above us. She picked up the paper, scanning it quickly. This is ridiculous, she muttered. An apology in writing. Who does that? People who want peace, I said. My brother leaned forward, his hands clasped. Just sign it, he whispered. His voice cracked. We can't keep carrying this. Her eyes flicked to him, then to me. And if I don't? I steadied my tone. Then we live with the truth exposed over and over. No more silence. The mantle clock struck once, sharp and steady. She flinched slightly at the sound. She sighed, grabbed the pen and scrawled her name. The ink pressed deep, letters sharp and quick. She slid the paper back across the table. My brother exhaled, shoulders sagging. Relief, fragile but present, filled the air. I read the signature once, then folded the paper neatly into the folder. My chest loosened. This was not victory. It was boundary. And boundaries protect more than they punish. She looked away, her voice quiet now. Happy? No, I said gently, but steady. Coffee percolated on the counter, its burbling sound soft but grounding. The smell filled the room, reminding us all that life continues. We sat together in silence. My brother rubbed his forehead, eyes closing briefly. She stared at the drapes, lips pressed tight. I reached for my cup, sipped slowly and let the warmth settle. The fight was over, but the cost was written in the silence between us. After a long pause she whispered, I shouldn't have laughed. I shouldn't have denied. The words were small but they were real. I nodded once. Thank you. The fridge hummed again, filling the space where more words could have been. My brother opened his eyes, relief softening his face. We finished coffee quietly. No dessert, no laughter, no chatter to cover unease. Just the steady sounds of a house exhaling after too long. When they left, I stood alone in the living room. Afternoon sun stretched across the floor, bright but gentle. The mantle clock tapped on, marking time that felt lighter now. I pressed my hand against the folder, feeling the paper inside. Terms apology signature ink that steadied more than shouting ever could. This was not triumph. This was dignity. And dignity holds longer than rage. I whispered softly. Peace has weight when it's written. The porch rain began again, light against the railing. I opened the window, letting cool air drift in. The house smelled of coffee and wet leaves. My chest rose then fell, easier now. The battle was not a loud one, not filled with speeches or grand victories. It was sealed quietly with pen and paper, with boundaries that would hold even when voices tried to twist. I walked to the kitchen, rinsed the cups and placed them upside down. Clean rims, silent witnesses. I dried them carefully and set them in their place. The neon clock buzzed softly overhead, but tonight its sound felt less harsh. Tonight it marked the beginning of steadier days. The house was quiet but not empty. Quiet justice had landed. And this time it would last. The house felt different after they left. It was not louder or emptier, only steadier. Afternoon sun stretched across the drapes, soft and forgiving, turning the dust in the air into threads of quiet gold. The mantle clock tapped on each sound, reminding me that time carries even the heaviest weeks forward. I leaned against the counter, palms flat against the cool stone. The air vent whispered overhead, steady and calming, like a reminder that breath is stronger when it slows. For the first time in days, I felt that the house was mine again, not claimed by denial, not filled with tension, but waiting to be lived in. On the kitchen table sat the folder. Plain on the outside, ordinary as any envelope of bills or receipts, but weightier than any of them. Inside it lay her signature, written apology, and the terms that now stood between us. I traced its edges with my hand. Proof was not loud. Proof was not a weapon. Proof was simply steady, and steady was enough. I poured myself coffee. The percolator had finished long ago, but its warmth remained. Steam curled upward as I cupped the mug with both hands. The scent filled the kitchen, mixing with the faint lemon of earlier cleaning. Ordinary smells, grounding smells, the kind that carry a body forward when the heart is still tired. I thought of the week behind me. The lipstick rim on the cup, her smirk, her laugh, my brother's weary plea for peace. The silence that followed my question at the table. The way denial rushed to fill the air, louder than evidence. And then the report. The words printed on paper, stronger than whispers, stronger even than my voice. It was not a victory. Victory suggests triumph, conquest, domination. This was not that. What I carried forward was not the thrill of winning, but the steadiness of knowing I had not lost myself to anger. That was the lesson. I stood at the window and watched rain tapping gently against the porch rail. The sound was soft, like fingers drumming a memory into wood. Rain has no need to shout. It falls steady until the ground understands. I thought of truth in the same way. It does not rush, does not scream, does not twist itself for acceptance. It simply waits, falling drop by drop until no one can deny the ground is wet. The proof had spoken. The terms were signed. Yet what mattered most was not the ink. What mattered was the choice I made at each step, to wait instead of rage, to steady instead of strike, to trust paper more than performance. My brother's words echoed still. Why can't peace be enough? I whispered my answer again, soft as breath. Because peace without truth is only silence, and silence can suffocate. I set the mug down and opened the folder once more. Her name curved across the page, sharp strokes pressed harder than needed. Anger still lived in the ink, but apology lived there too. I let my fingers rest on the page, then closed it gently. I did not need to look again. The lesson was already written in me. Boundaries are not punishments, they are instructions for respect. And respect, once demanded, has the power to heal. The house carried its familiar sounds again. The fridge hummed, the mantle clock tapped, the rain softened into a steady rhythm outside. Each sound reminded me that life continues. Dignity does not need applause. It needs only a safe place to stand. I walked slowly through the rooms, switching off lights one by one. In the hallway, Lysol lingered faintly from my earlier cleaning. In the living room, the drapes glowed faintly with the last light of day. In the kitchen, the folder waited steady as stone. I sat again at the table and wrote in my notebook. Dignity grows quiet. It never needs an audience. Boundaries are love that finally includes myself. Documents protect the heart when trust is thin. The words were short, but they carried the truth of what I had lived. Later I opened the window. Cool air drifted in, carrying the smell of wet leaves and the sound of distant laughter from children playing. Life outside carried on, unconcerned with my week of proof and denial. That was its own comfort. Storms inside houses do not stop the seasons beyond them. I thought of her face when she signed. The way she pressed the pen too hard, the way her eyes darted to my brother for rescue. Signing had not erased her resentment, but it had set the line, a line that gave me space to breathe. To live, to stand steady in my own home. That is the truth most people forget. Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of boundaries that no one can cross without consequence. The rain eased. The porch rail glistened under the streetlight. The house smelled of coffee and damp wood. My chest rose, then fell. Calm now. I whispered softly. Patience was enough. And it was. This story was never only about a cup. It was about choices, whether to shout or wait, whether to wound or steady, whether to let denial win or let paper speak. I chose patience. And patience gave me proof. I chose dignity. And dignity gave me peace. The lesson I leave with is not mine alone. It is one I hope others hold too. When trust feels thin, let documents protect you. When words twist, let boundaries stand. And when anger tempts you, choose steadiness instead. Because in the end, quiet justice always outlasts the loudest denial. The mantle clock struck again, steady as ever. I closed my eyes, breathed deeply, and let the house rest. If this story spoke to you, please subscribe to True Tales. More stories wait here, true tales of family betrayal, dignity, and the quiet justice that follows. Start with the Switch playlist, where the wrong cup tells the right story. Or continue with wedding, betrayal, and inheritance, and legal reveal, where witnesses, documents, and dates carry peace back into the room. Stay with us. Each story will remind you that truth, no matter how long it waits, always finds its way home.